Let's get to it. Thanks for your time, Simon. It'd be really good if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you've what you've done over the years to end up at the Sydney Roosters.
Yeah, so mate, yep, Sydney Roosters, as you mentioned, currently the role here is head of performance. So yeah, really great club with some really experienced staff to come and try and help them align to the footy program was the reason, I guess, for the challenge to come over and test myself in some different waters. So how we get here, mate, is I guess a 20-year career where team sport has always sort of been where I've found myself back in. I worked in the institutions a little bit with high performance sport New Zealand with some great individual athletes to a really high caliber, but yeah, the team sport model, mate, just seems to sort of fit with me. So yeah, first full-time job was back with the Southland Stags many moons ago. Rugby was a passion. Obviously, as we know in New Zealand, it's a bit of a way of life, but yeah, I've been really fortunate, mate, to have some great mentors, numerous different roles within different sports. And I think the beauty of each of those is, you pick your best bits from each, from the coaches you spend your time with, from the programs you're involved in, and then also, your own programming throughout your career. And, you're a constant evolution of pulling those best pieces out, pulling your learnings out and trying to put those into place. So, yeah, so prior to coming to here, I was with the Highlanders, and also had done one term with the All Blacks 15. But as I say, I saw a challenge come up, an opportunity come up, and decided it would be good for growth to come and see how things go.
It's quite interesting what you mentioned there, sort of changing different environments, and obviously the Stags, the Highlanders. I know you've been with Japan and High Performance New Zealand. Do you have a sort of a philosophy that you carry through? What's it like going from one environment to the next? How do you handle the differences and the different situations you've got when you get, and obviously going from rugby now into rugby league, did you feel like there was an underlying part of you that goes with it, or did you have to change a lot?
I think there's a couple of areas of that. There's parts of you that you can't change, and then you have to be really adaptable on the other hand. And I know that sort of sounds, counterintuitive, but I think your values have to stay the same, and who you are as a person has to change. But you mentioned Japan. That's a great example. So I went to Japan as a coach at the time, who was probably very big on my people skills, on my questioning techniques, my ability to draw information out of the athlete, to converse, to gain a rapport. And I was probably very heavy on what we call the coaching skill, or the art of coaching, and my data analytics, my keeping, my foundations is probably not a default characteristic of mine, which is really, really strong. But to get over there, to provide the example answer for your question is, I couldn't speak their language. So there's a couple of ways in which you can gain people's trust. One is to get results, and to get results, you have to show individualization, and we could actually talk through, not through numbers. I think, you still take in the energy and enthusiasm, and your body language is a universal language. But until I learned to converse enough, I had to be very good at showing I cared by, showing I knew them as an individual. And part of that was a number. And then, I had to grow that personal piece because of the language barrier. So, that's that adaptation that I was meaning, where you have to be really adaptive and responsive. And I got some really good challenge from my coach there at the time around, originally probably wasn't good enough in that space. So, mate, had to knuckle down and look at some systems and create some systems that helped me in something that wasn't a default strength. And then flip that back, finish the World Cup, come back to the Highlanders. Totally different. You're back in a New Zealand culture of which you understand, home franchise, speaking their language. And again, it's how do you mould from, I think you've got your environment and your people. That's where you have to be adaptive. But you as a coach, you will adapt your skills to there. But fundamentally, you probably need to have your own values and know who you are as a coach. So, you can hold true to that throughout that adaptation as well, depending on which way you get pulled.
You must have to be a little bit of a chameleon, though, with the differences between the Highlanders, the Japanese, and then the NRL and the Roosters, right? Quite different.
Yeah.
Even between rugby and rugby league, I assume there's quite different personalities.
Yep, different personalities, different mindset, different way things are done, and I think high performance systems will be the same, across a lot of sports in terms of their themes. And then obviously it's your nuances of those that you challenge. But a really good book by Adam Grant, Hidden Potential, I think it's called, and he just called it, which a basic word, but you do have to embrace being an imperfectionist, because if you try and strive for perfection in everything, you'll bog yourself down. And especially I guess now in my current role where I've got a really amazing team with some really skilled staff, probably 10 to 12 different people contributing there. You let them run what they need to run. And if I was too focused on everything being perfection, I might miss, certain areas because, I need to have that breadth to be able to look, but also to make a system run. I think there's certain things, you have to prioritize what are the basics we need to do really well and what are some of the small things that maybe, we're wasting time with or are not making the boat go faster. So where do we cut that excess weight? So yeah, as you say, jack of all trades, be comfortable with sometimes having to be a little bit of an imperfectionist. And I don't think that means that you don't do a good job. I think that means you learn to prioritize better, learn where to cut some of the weight. And all of our currency is energy, isn't it? And you only have so much energy to go around, whether it be yours or someone else's. So that imperfectionism, I think, helps you manage energy, I think is a good way to put it.
That's quite interesting. You've obviously had a bit of definitely an impact over at the Roosters, because I saw a quote from James Tedesco about the change that you'd made since you'd arrived there, and as an old guy, I mean, I guess you're dealing with guys like that have been around the block a long time. So coming in as an outsider must be quite interesting. So maybe those fundamentals and the imperfections that you talk about, there's some respect there, obviously, that you've gained pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think so. Sometimes, mate, like I guess a little bit you're shiny and new. Everyone likes something that's shiny and new, and I guess the real proof in the pudding, mate, is if they're still saying that in a year or two. But I think what we did focus on here, and it wasn't just me. There was Trent Robertson, the coach here. Good visionary as well. But also very sure of what he wants and where we need to go. So I think it was just providing really good clarity for the players. And then slowly understanding the why. And as you say, each team you go to, different sort of culture, different style athlete. Key part is how you find the why, whether it be for the individual or for the team or for the group. And if you can get them sort of believing, or seeing value, the proof comes from that. So, belief doesn't come from you telling them something. Belief comes from them experiencing it, so you sort of provide a bit of proof. And I guess for us pre-season, I was really fortunate to be able to trial a few things that worked well for us. And first year in most roles, you learn and implement something. I think second year is the toughest year because you're expected to know more, and then you're trying to implement those learnings, but there's a higher expectation from yourself and others. And then third year, some of those things are now starting to come to fruition if you're trying to make change. If there was no need for change, it's okay, how are we continuing to know what we're doing and be better. So I think your first year, you always have a honeymoon period where you're sort of lucky. And if you're getting things wrong, people give you a bit of breathing space because they're like, well, they're new, they're learning an environment. And Japan was definitely like that. Like, we made a lot of errors, not intentional, obviously, but a lot of learnings were made in our first 12 months, but they set us up for the final 24 months to be amazing. And if we hadn't had some of those learnings and things had gone well in the first 12 months, you just wonder, would we have been internally as critical? And would we have actually turned the microscope on ourselves as much as we did? So, in the long run, I think they shaped us up for a really successful period after that.
Mm. Just thinking about when you talk about sort of, I guess, the cultural piece and the belief. Is that something that's changed over the years? Because it feels like, back in the old days of when we used to play rugby, it was pretty rip, shit and bust. It was like you get in and do the job. Whereas now I hear a lot more about what the culture of the team is like, and and these sorts of things around the mental game and stuff like that. Is that something that you've noticed has changed a lot over the years?
Yeah, I think it has. And as you say, like back in the day, if you weren't good enough, you were told you weren't good enough and you weren't selected, they might not even tell you. You just show up and, you're not putting your jersey on or whatever it might be. But I think when we look back then, we probably didn't realise how much we can influence performance. It was like the guys were either good enough, they made their tackles, they played well on the day, or they didn't. And we probably reviewed some things at a really high level, but, we didn't understand the nature of all of that. And you look back and you wonder if teams of yesteryear, if they reflected on those things, from, as you say, a cultural point of view, mental skills point of view, how do they deal with arousal, failure, and those sorts of things, rather than maybe just throwing back a few beers and having arguments or fights and, some of the old school stories that come out, you start to look at it. I think the other part this time, John, is as you're aware, is the amount of investment nowadays. You have to be covering all that because, the game was amateur. and then it was semi-professional. Now it's professional, and it's still growing, and it doesn't really matter what sport you're in. The investment in sport is huge. So like any business, they want to know now what you're doing for, their $1 million athletes, their $20 million athletes, whatever sport you might be in. You have to show that you're providing them the best. And I think that's probably the change. If I guess we talk about performance culture versus team culture, I think they've seen now that team culture needs to be good for people to gel, to go the same way and to get a performance. And I think that shows in the closest games and the toughest times that maybe the most connected teams are generally ones that come out on top. In a performance culture point of view, yeah, there is greater expectation, and you've had to learn and 20-year career now deal with that as you go, because there's more investment, which means more expectation. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean more gimmicky. I think it means how do we just ensure that we are doing the basics to the best of our abilities and keeping it simple.
So sort of talking about that investment and the professionalism now, what does a week look like for you as head of performance at the Roosters? And I guess compare that to what it used to look like when you were at Stags or something,
Yeah. It's probably easy to start it with the first one. So at the Stags, yeah, Rasuto manager, you filled drink bottles, you made sure the bibs were washed, quite often washing them at home yourself, your training bibs. You made sure that the gates were open for people to get to the training park. You ran some gym sessions, and then you did the reverse of that. You picked it all up and packed it all up in the end. So, you were definitely a jack of all trades there. You might have had a dietitian or nutritionist on board, but they weren't full time. So any strategies they wanted, you might have been making shakes yourself. You might have been, getting the foods and stuff ready. You assisted the manager because generally you only would have had one person there, so you have with logistics. Obviously, you had your own area where you ran your speed, your skills, etc. And then, timing lights. Not everyone had timing lights back in the day. So, you start learning about timing lights and using those. GPS came in. You start having to teach yourself that because there's not generally people that, were in your region that had those experiences. So a lot of self-learning, a lot of learning as you go, but I feel that's the best way because a couple of things with that. There's things I was doing at the Stags that I learned that I probably haven't changed much over a 20-year career now, and it's because you forged them through error, you found out they worked, and obviously you modify them slightly, over time to probably, refine things a wee bit, but that was it. To a week now at the Roosters, we start our week always with a high-performance meeting, so we've got 3 physios, a couple of S&C coaches, a couple of sports scientists, a doctor, and a dietitian, so we need to be super aligned because there's a footy program to run. And I guess it's our responsibility as a team to make sure that we can get those players in their best ability. So one, they train well, they retain their learnings and information, and they're ready to go for the week. And you try and take the stress off the coaches because, they're the ones that are having to put the performance on the field and are held accountable to that and to how the players are. So especially for your head coach. So our role, if I see it here at the Roosters, is if we can take as much stress because the coaches are really clear on who's available, what they can do. They're aware that we're managing a load of players that need it. They know that we're providing the best training environment for them, and how they know that is because we're monitoring things. The data we use, obviously, with the system you guys have created for us, why we had to put it all in one place. We meet with that, and then throughout the week, obviously the physios are keeping guys in contact there. They're treating them with massage and rehab, prehab stuff, keeping them going well there. The S&C guys are making sure that, their gym work's done well, that they're fresh, they're feeling, powerful by the end of the week. The sports science, myself and the rest of the crew monitoring their well-being through the week, checking on their numbers because we obviously screen. We do 2 what we call physical screens. We have a check-in every day where they're just subjectively telling us how they feel on some different markers. We weigh them a couple of times a week. There's other markers we take, grip strength, etc., counter movement jumps. We start monitoring all of that stuff. So there is a whole lot of science in the background of it, but to be fair, it's actually most of that is best because it sparks conversations for us. And that's something I still think that sometimes we miss. We have so much data and we just rely on the data to tell us everything, but we use the data to start a conversation. So I think most of the players here, if they were ever quizzed, was like, what happens with your screening data? They say, I flag, Jonesy or Ben or someone comes and talks to me about it. And if it's bad and, we go further with our modified training or, we talk about what needs to be achieved. So throughout the week amongst that great, highly skilled group of people that I mentioned before, we're just talking to our athletes, managing through their training, treating them for any niggles they have. So hopefully every time we come to game day, we're ready to go. And the NRL's a savage beast, mate. It's 30 rounds before you hit finals, if you include your preseason. Hugely physical game, with really irregular turnarounds. So you can play anywhere from a Thursday to a Monday. depending on the draw. So, you can have some really irregular in different weeks. So, it's a big beast and fun to be part of.
Well, what you said about the data starting the conversation, I found really interesting, because we've had a number of conversations with people around the collection of data and the data that's coming into a team, and the lack of engagement with the athletes, I guess, and that the athletes aren't necessarily seeing the data and being engaged in the process. But that sounds like for you, it is actually quite engaging with the athletes, and that having that data is giving you that starting conversation, which is quite interesting. Are the athletes then also getting interested in the data as well, or is what's the play there at the moment with data and the athletes getting involved?
We have quite a few athletes, mate, that are really keen. They come and see Benny, who's our sports science coordinator. They'll come and see him, and some of them like to know their training metrics. They might understand a couple of metrics that they feel good with. They like to do that. You have a range of guys that they know they need to do it. It's the thing they're not fussed on, so they're just like, hey, you tell me what I need to do, because that's your area, not mine. I'll just show up and do what you tell me to do. And then you have the other ones, mate, that they sort of know that they value it, so they want to see, hey, I know I'm a bit stiff. What armour scores do I need to maybe change something here and look at it? But whether they like it or not, what's quite good is there's an example was I'll use James Tedesco, mate. He made just an error one day and put a 4 rather than a 6. The number's erroneous, really, but he's so consistent in that area that 4 or 5 people went up and spoke to him, and he was sort of frustrated. He goes, oh, look, I've told everyone it was an error. And I was like, well, that's our system working, because it means if there was something wrong, 4 or 5 people have just done what they're meant to do, checking on those areas and make sure that there's nothing we need to modify, before you get into your week or your day. So he sort of laughed and he goes, oh, I guess it is working. But, we need the data, and we obviously make assumptions based on data, and then we need to go and obviously find out a little bit more. But there's no point knowing that someone's flagging on 3 or 4 different metrics you collect without going and talking to the athlete first, because often you'll have a really basic answer of, look, mate, I had a really horrible sleep. And then straight away, that's why their mood score's down. That's probably why they're feeling tight and stiff, because it's, it's all interrelated. And then you can, okay, simple sleep, mate, nothing else going on. No, that was simply it. Okay, how do we get you good then? Because we know it's not a huge deal. It's a one-off, et cetera, et cetera. That might lead to the fact that I know I've been having really poor sleeps over a long time, and then therefore is a different conversation, because something may be a little bit more systemic, and you go, okay, now we need to talk a bit more about intervention. So, yeah, if you just looked at flags and flagged things without going and talking to people, one, you'd just be pissing a whole lot of people off, because you're probably taking more people out than the coach wants, because you haven't actually spoken to somebody. And then the coach will go and say, oh, here, no, mate, I'm fine. I just had a bad sleep. Or, you're going the other way about it, and you're over-reporting. So the conversation is for me, off the back of it, the best piece. So anyone that flags acutely, which could be with our squad of 35, 6 to 7 guys a day based on different aspects. There might only be 1 or 2 that ever require, even the smallest modification. The rest of them, it's probably a one-off monitor, but that's where we have our longitudinal tracking, and we get to see trends and themes, etc., of obviously which we can jump on, and that obviously then determines your intervention if any is required. So I think it's a system where we do collect quite a lot of data points, but we refined it this year, and we didn't collect anything that we didn't use. So if it's not going to influence a conversation, we don't use it. And already this year, there's some other things we've had that we thought would continue with that will probably drop off last year, because it's not something that seems to be initiating conversation or really giving us, much to follow. So whether we replace that with a test or say, look, our other ones are actually doing the job, we don't maybe need to fill a number just for the sake of another number. But again, yeah, we generally try and look at something and go, when was the last time it was used? Was it actually flagging anything at all? And could we measure our interventions off that? And if no, then sometimes you look at why create or collect the data.
It's quite interesting. I've been in the data game for a long time, not in the sports space. And there's always been this conversation around actionable KPIs or actionable metrics. And it's almost like you guys have conversational metrics. It's like the metrics have to be important to start a conversation, which is a really interesting way to look at it, because, ultimately an actionable metric in your environment is something that sparks that conversation and obviously leads to some benefit for the players and the team for improvement, right? So I guess this whole data collection piece has obviously changed a lot, even just in the time you've been there. Over the years, it would have been a massive change from definitely from the Stags, but even probably from your days at the Highlanders. You've noticed a bit of change in from a data perspective, what's being used now and what you're using from a day-to-day?
Yeah, I think most of us, would follow literature and academia, and you know what's proven, but then you also don't want to fall behind. So you look at maybe what's being innovative out there, maybe what are some new things you think could work for you. But straight away, I think you've got to come back and look at, who have you got? What have we got to test? And what can we make work in our own environment before we actually, you look in the mirror before you look out the window, I guess is the best way to put it. So as you say, what I was doing at the Highlanders, that was Highlander specific. What equipment did we have? What training week were we putting together? What staff did I have? What did we value? And then, you come to the Roosters and you go, okay, quite a different team, different environment, different staff, different range of testing equipment. So you certainly have the things that are tried and true. But I think if you only ever tested what you like, you have that bias of, I've always liked this, so I'm just going to keep my faith in this one thing. Now, that can be both a positive and a negative, because obviously it stops you being, probably growing as much and also seeing what else is out there that can maybe take place. But I think the more I see the best professionals in the best groups, I think, John, just do the basics better than everybody else. Now, what that means is, counter movement jump has been done for a long time now. It's a simple test that can tell you a number of factors. It can tell you how powerful someone is. So is your strength and conditioning program working to make someone more explosive and powerful? Because generally field sport athletes will need that. But also, are they fatigued? They're the two main basic areas you might use a counter movement jump for. So different formulas come up, different ways to measure the counter movement jump. Technology increases, our maths analysis, our formulas, our stats are improving. The way we look at this and analyze that's always improving. But before all that happens, you actually have to nail your counter movement jump with, good consistency, regularity, try and control the variables first. Because other than, like all data, if it's not, sort of clean and replicable each time, there's too many moving variables and assumptions. So there's parts of that which we are prepared, if I say to go back to the imperfectionist, there's some tests we use which we're prepared to take those variations because they're there every week, and we know that there's going to be a certain amount of noise or width in that. And then there's other tests that we don't. We structure and standardize really clearly. But I think the range of testing equipment is becoming better. You get companies like Avowed who, now have multiple testing platforms. We used to have to try and go to others. So these cloud providers that they have now with their own analysis platforms, the ever increasing look and investment into sports science has been the big change for us. And I guess the issue then is, because of all this new data we have, what actually affects performance on a Saturday versus what is important in a gym? And that's the question I'm still not being able to answer here. It is a program and an issue we're working on in the background. But in counter movement jump, is eccentric rate of force development versus concentric rate of force more important for performance on game day? Now, there's enough data taken on field that if you have someone that can program and code to a high enough level, you can start looking at the thousands of metrics we take versus field performance if someone can create that algorithm. But mate, I'm not a huge academic, but a couple of the papers I've read recently is there's still no mechanical model that is 100% predicting sports outcomes because of the human factor that's in that. So we have to remember that as accurate as our data is, when you're dealing with humans and the nature of everything that is involved in that, it's not just I guess numbers and data and stats, is that other picture. So that's the really hard part, which I think all of us, that would be our utopia, is that. And I know there are some programs out there and some some highly level resource places where that is probably the level that they're at. My question to them, which I'd love to ask them, and there's some that I have in environments I know, and there's we have things that tailor our training, which is ideally what we all like, that we can see a positive correlation to something, to a certain percentage or a certain confidence interval, etc. But, no, it's not an outright determinant of performance, and someone can still have an amazing metric there and have a completely poor game, etc. and different things. So I think we're still working out that interrelationship as a profession in contact sports around, what are those crucial metrics. Now, if you value work rate, if you value power, if you value strength, yes, we can write all these close correlations. We can look at post-contact meters, but generally you're still looking at maybe a coach's perspective of what they think is the most valuable. So again, there's still that human element in there, and, you take stats from the NRL, and there are some team stats where the best teams have the best stats, but there's also some where they're not, so straight away you start going, not even the rugby stats themselves, so the footy stats themselves fully predict, outcomes of performance, because some teams may choose. My time with Tony Brown is we flipped the way we played rugby union because of the group of people we had and the idea that we thought we tried to do it. So therefore, our metrics and outputs are going to be very different from, what you've been currently looking at, because we chose to do that. So straight away, your data is a little bit null and void, because you're like, well, hey, we're looking at a different game plan. So as I say, if I go back, I think every organisation, it's great to know what other data's out there, but the more you can look in the mirror and make your reflection better, more refined, and be comparing your own apples with your own apples as best you can. And then you start looking out the window and saying, okay, how do we maybe compare to those around us for things that are replicable and that, that we can maybe draw some correlations against. But yeah, the human factor of how you train, who your head coach is, who your head of performance is, there's research out there that says changes in heads of performance leads to hamstring injuries, because they come in, they want to increase load and they want to have, greater impact. There's all this human element, mate, that can come into all these things as well.
Yeah, totally. You mentioned the data science piece in there, and it's interesting because of the I guess the difference between the simple metrics that spark a conversation versus what data science can do. How do you balance out that the use of data science or I guess going deeper in that space? What's the difference in information that you might get or benefit you might get from a data science effort versus using the metrics that spark the conversation?
I think, mate, like the system you guys built for us, we put in all our metrics for that, right? And that has improved our conversations from staff member to staff member within the high performance environment, from performance staff to coach, and then obviously from us to player. So that efficiency that it granted us by having things in one spot, pulling from all our different service providers we use now, the different APIs we have, it's the 90% of our week, because it's like in high performance, if the water bottles aren't filled, the cones and the balls aren't pumped up right, and the coaches don't know what they're doing for training, it's a shit day at training, regardless of your fancy metrics and your science and your skills, right? So I think, as you say, the data for normal reporting and conversation, it's making sure that your system is running and your days are there. The data science is where you're looking for the magic that should be constantly challenging your own system. Now, for me, if I go back to those first roles you're asking me about, because you're sort of an =1 and you're doing all of that, you didn't really have time to do that until, off season. And then in off season, you'd quickly throw all your numbers in, you'd ask yourself a couple of questions and you'd say, is our training actually matching, this game demand, or was this working? What is the relationship maybe between some of these things? And as I say, with me, not actually, I'm not a computer programmer, mate. I've never learned a lot of programming. So a lot of it was slow Excel, manual work. You would answer a couple of questions, which hopefully did then determine the way you trained and the why you train. So I think the data science piece at the background, that's what we all need. Some of us have, some of us don't. You need that to sort of be asking those questions in the background, constantly challenging why we're doing something, looking for correlations of, hey, this is good, cutting the stuff that we don't need. As an example, we sort of started looking and trying to run a program in the background of different counter movement jump metrics. The player scoring that we used, again, it's someone's scoring model, but we used that. We could see that 2 or 3 of those metrics related and the others didn't. So that's a way in which, if you have data science that's working for you, you can cut off some of the noise that you don't need and hopefully hone your system to be even more, exact to what you need. And again, it's hopefully doing the basics really, really well. So, data science removes some of the external noise, maybe points you in a new direction, whereas the data reporting and the data management is your day-to-day conversations and ensuring that, we're not missing anything there, having those conversational pieces and keeping the wheel, greasing the wheel and keeping that going really, really well.
It's quite very interesting. I'm just wondering what you think, what happens from here? What's happening in tech and I guess in data, but mostly, the sort of the technology side of things in sport. Where's that? Because it's already, we've seen, obviously you've talked about devices and different systems you use like Vold. GPS, obviously. Where do you see that going? Where do you see the next sort of technology advancement in sport?
I think, sport replicates society in a certain way. Like something comes in, it's fashionable, it's hip, it's the new thing, and then slowly over time, a few studies are done on it, and you realise it's maybe not quite as proven and quite as good. But I think each time some of these new things come in, they ultimately get you to reflect on your own practice. Because if you do try them, if you look at them, if you're going to bring something into place, you're going to implement something, it should be because it's going to be an improvement on what you have. Now, sometimes you have to try that first to see if that's the case. But there's a number of things out there, whether it be a new device, a new supplement, a new score. They make new ways to do things. They market it really well. It looks really good. But then you go, you know what? It's not actually changing our environment or making our environment go any faster. So that's the role, I guess, of some of the leaders within these clubs, is to try and differentiate between what works well, what's really backed very early by strong science, what's maybe something that's more, moderate and developing, and what do you want to sort of throw your resource and your money at. So at the moment, things that are instant and providing instant feedback, that's the real difference. We used to have to wait for things to download, or, things are a little bit slow going to a cloud, and, being able to swab hydration tests now rather than having to pee in a cup, and, false negatives of different things. But I think technology, like a cell phone, is going to keep advancing, but not every feature that comes out is a win. It's just new at the time, and then the best features will continue, and I see that happening the same for us. And as I say, the key challenge for us is what do we buy into, what do we not? Obviously, sometimes you can follow what's happening maybe in some greater sports where there's much greater infrastructure already in place, see what they're doing. But again, is it replicable to what you need? And contact sports are different to a lot of other sports, and they require, different things. And then rugby league itself is so different. There's obviously contact in American sports where there's huge budget put in, but, the game time and the contacts through pads and helmets, it's just totally different. So again, you can try and see what's happening in technology, what might work for us. But for me, AI, it's coming in. It's a big thing, but again, complex puzzles of AI that are changing the way, a human looks at something. I'm no specialist in this space whatsoever, mate, but what's the balance between, no, I still need someone that has human cognition versus something that's working on a mathematical model of stats to be able to provide this. Now, obviously, mate, machine learning's outside my scope to be talking about in any sort of context. But I guess that for me is, that's our struggle at the moment, isn't it? There's so much new development. It's moving so fast. We start asking AI all these questions, and we, if we take that, as gospel, there has to be someone there that's still in the background that knows our stuff and goes, actually, I'm going to challenge that. And then how many good coaches and how many professionals in any area have a certain amount of gut instinct, and that gut is sometimes the thing that wins. And you read Daniel Kahneman's book Thinking Fast and Slow, and he talks about gut instinct is not actually gut instinct. It's your supercomputer that recognizes all these things has happened millions of times and instantly gives you feedback. He said it's not a roll of the dice that I feel like it. A gut is a proven thing for people with knowledge, experience, and reflection. So yeah, mate, probably getting a wee bit off topic for me, but I guess that would be my fear. If you say to me, where's it going? My current role is to try and be as innovative as we can, look at what's on the market and make sure we don't fall behind, but also how do we make sure where our investment is going is long-term and going to have an effect on this club to make it go faster rather than, hey, it's new, it's sexy, let's give it a roll and see what happens.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you raised the coaches and the gut instinct, and it seems to be a lot of the conversations I'm having is coaches aren't necessarily getting as involved in the data as what some of the performance staff are, and coaches are still quite traditional in many senses around how they manage a team, and they kind of need to be the people person and the strategy that comes from lots of experience and lots of knowledge of the game rather than just looking at the data. Is that changing though? Is it the newer generation of coaches? Do you reckon we're seeing coaches being more interested in the data side of things, or are they still kind of coming through with that traditional mindset?
I think it's depends on who that person is. Like, if you're personality profile is someone that, likes to compartmentalize stuff, deal with data, see stats, that's where you might put it. But I listened to a podcast with Tony Brown recently, and I've seen it in action with coaches that I work with, that you get the coaches that are so hung up on the data or getting their video clips right and making sure that their video clips are ready for presentation, that they're behind their computer all the time and not actually talking to the athlete. Now, how many athletes within your target group actually learn from that one video session that you put up versus, you getting alongside them before or after training, talking through the clips differently, or using a rack model or something to show those, because I think that's the case. And apart from the data scientist you mentioned before, we do want them just looking at data almost, from an unobjective point and just going, what does all this tell me? What are my correlations? Even your sports science coordinator, your data manager, etc. I have to get in front of you and ask you questions or run the tests. And if I don't have those social skills or social abilities, I'm not, my data's not going to be as good. Maybe my queuing's not quite right, or I let you away with something. And so I sort of think part of that piece is the culture is changing, but I believe if it's the balance of whenever there's a person involved, you have to get that part right. Now, for me, I need people that are great in that data science place, because as I say, my own self-reflection awareness is detailed record keeping and data entry, etc., is not my strong point. It's something I've had to work on so I can be that well-rounded person. But to have other people that are that foil for me, so I can go off and try and be, innovative, have some of those conversations, probably try and get around a little bit, and see the bigger picture, pick up on some of those areas that other people aren't looking for. You need that foil. So I think within any organisation, you want a variety of personalities because they complement each other. And if you all went sort of pretty stale and said, I need just data people, or I need just people or whatever, you'll actually miss, some of the beauty of what, different personalities and variety offer. So, and I think that's a key part, mate, around you don't need to agree, but you need to align, and you want a point of difference. So there is some discussion. And at the end of the day, a good department will align despite the fact they all might not agree. And I guess, you need that range of personalities where someone's arguing purely on data, what the numbers are saying, what they see, how much they provide on that. And then the other person that's going, but I know this guy's history. I speak to him all the time. I've got a feeling there's this. And I think, that's the perfect model of both.
I think I listened to the same podcast with Tony. It was quite interesting, him talking about the fact that he's a rugby man first,
Yeah.
We work with Tony a little bit with our product as well, and with obviously when he was at the Highlanders, but also now in South Africa. And he uses the data for strategy, and he'll review the data from them. But the most important thing to him is the players, and those relationships, which is really, really quite interesting. And it's compartmentalizing when data is important and when it's not, right?
Yeah. And you can have a player come in, mate, on our wellness check, right? And they say that they're feeling good. They put in that they're motivated to train, and, they say they don't have any soreness and that they sleep really well. And then you look at them and you just call bullshit, and the players are pretty well educated on knowing that if they're really honest, Z scores, different variations, standard deviations, etc. We get to see, when you flag and when you don't flag. So if you're really consistent, a small thing's a big deal. If you're all over the place, that's cool. We know that, and then we get an idea. But there's times there that if I didn't look at the human themselves, because they want to play that weekend, or they don't want to be a drain on the team, or they just maybe don't actually like that personal connection with people getting in their space, they might just actually put what they're feeling. So, mate, a good set of eyes and a set of ears. My ears need probably some work every now and then, but good set of eyes and set of ears, mate, are just as important, because, as I say, your data's only as good as how honest it is. And if you were just, because we just have, mate, for instance, they come in, they say g'day to our receptionist, Cal's lovely, and then there's 3 iPads out and they do their first check-in for the day, right? But part of that is we generally try and have a staff member floating around at the same point. If not, it's their next point of call where they come in. And that's why our physical screening is also quite good, because there is 3 or 4 staff in contact with the players immediately there, so, and that's important. We had a guy that was a bit sniffly, put in that was a bit sniffly, few more conversations, few checks, mate, COVID, Now, if we hadn't put we got challenged around us, how's a guy with that even get in the building? And that's a different conversation. But the fact was, because there was a personal element to it, we followed up on a few of the very small flags he had marked, and then actually followed through in action that, we got him out of the building, sooner rather than later. Whereas had that just been data orientated alone, we probably would have just let that guy stay in all day and had a look and kept a small monitor on him because we knew he was slightly off, but nothing was flagging majorly. But a few small things, a bit of a look, a bit of a conversation, and there's the example of that.
That kind of brings to me that the conversations we've had a number of times is around these wearables. So,
Yep.
Whoops and Apple devices or Samsung or what have you, in replacing the check-ins in the morning, the wellness checks and stuff like that with hard data coming from these wearables. Do you think that's somewhere where, actually the data doesn't lie there where players can in these wellness checks? Do you think there's going to be a shift
where,
there?
As from a personal point of view, it's something I'm researching at the moment and looking for which one of those may work for us. Is it the investment we want to go down, and how does that look? Heart rate variability is still seen as one of the gold standards. Starting to see again, this is my observations, not my opinions. You're now starting to see the odd article that says, is heart rate variability, as tight as we think it is? But that's the nature, as I say, of anything. Creatine years ago, mate, was, bloating you, giving kidney damage, and was bad. Now, the most widely studied thing ever is totally harmless and fine for you. So things will go through, that I guess that attack, that scrutiny, which I think is important, because if it comes out the other side, obviously, it's greater for the general population that it's there. So I think you're right. Like, knowing someone, like we've done that for years. Before we had the tools to do it, we manually tested our own heart rate. And if we were up or down by a certain percentage, obviously it didn't have the standard deviations if you're doing it manually. But, there used to be a thing that, depending on what your max heart rate was, which would find out if you're 5 or 10 beats up or down, we might change your training. So a lot of these things have been in place for years because we understand the physiology, and the physiology is not changing. We're humans, we know how to adapt and how to change that, but obviously how we interpret that and how we learn about it, we're constantly evolving. So I think wearables certainly do have their place. I know a lot of high performing teams that are definitely using those, whether it be a Whoop, a wearable, where the ones are, are going just with, some of the top level Polar, Garmin, which are starting to get closer. But again, there's always a gold standard of what something's measuring. Is it measuring a pulse rate versus, an actual echo of your heart trace, which is, one's gold standard, one's not, and how accurate is that? So we have a number of players made in our environment that we Whoop. I was going to chat to them around, for instance, do we put your Whoop page onto our thing, and are they keen to upload and look at that? And again, why don't I in our environment do that, look at what it's doing for my players in my environment, and compare again apples with apples for us, and see, does it trace against it? Are they answering questions the same as what their Whoop is telling me? So, rather than see what's out there, I think one of the best ways to learn is, pick up the ball and run with it. So, we could do that within our own environment. We've got, I know of maybe 7 or 8 guys that have Whoop already. So why not? If it's a simple one and we know they wear it well, it's good. Ultimately, again, it comes down to, what's your uptake going to be? Now, some people are amazing, but generally most people that are wearing a Whoop is because they wanted one, they've gone out and invested in it and want it for themselves. And those ones that aren't, are they going to wear a Whoop if I ask them to wear one to bed every night? And someone goes, no, mate, I hate wearing a watch to bed, so I'm not wearing it. And then all of a sudden you go, okay. Now, if you get 70% of your team, that's still good. You can still make some assumptions based on that. It's still a good cohort of your own environment. But obviously, it's always going to, again, have the, those areas of that. But I think, mate, it's a huge area. I think it's only going to continue to grow. And I think if you go back to the technology you asked about before, excuse me, I think that's where things are going to end up. It's going to be more of the athlete monitoring and wellness space when they're not with us is going to be more important, because when they're here, we manage everything, right? We know what they're doing. We're measuring while they're here. So that's the part of which we can probably give most of ourselves a pretty big tick. We all do it slightly differently, but we do it pretty well. That I think will be the biggest part in sport, is understanding that and the individualization of it. So, fasting glucose, constant. I went to a tech seminar recently where those similar sort of pads, can now test, instant hydration. So you're knowing someone's hydration 24/7 as well as their glucose, continuous glucose monitors. But, how you eat an apple and how I eat an apple, we think it's an apple. It's a certain thing our body's processing differently. Does that have an effect on me? Does it have a performance? I think that's the utopia where things are going to try and end up, would be everything's totally individualized. But mate, that's where, your processing speeds and your data scientists are going to have to be right up there, because, if everyone's dealing with their own individual plans and you've got massive squads and everything's going to be tailored to that, what do we then value that's going to be actually, used intervention versus just testing something and, what's that line going to cross, because there's just so much data out there. But I do think, as you say, mate, there's a big place for that, and that's probably where the bigger shift will come.
Yeah, it's cool. I have one of those because I'm a diabetic and I have a Whoop as well. So I'm a little bit of a one-man experiment. But there's an old saying in the data space: you get what you measure, and it's quite interesting.
Yes.
It's from my perspective, having the Whoop, and because I'm a data guy as well, obviously, having that data for me has been hugely motivational to improve my sleep, to improve my my stress levels, and improve my activity as well. But not everyone's like that, right? So it's I think, like you say, if you got 70% of the team doing it, then potentially the general benefit will be quite good.
I think, mate, just to support that, like for me, if I was to make a pyramid of, how we get our advances, a lot of the data we're measuring, it actually sits right up the very top of the pyramid, at the bottom of the pyramid, which is we try and measure, but it's harder to quantify, but it's exactly what we're talking about, is sleep is our biggest anabolic agent. It's where all our recovery occurs. So every other recovery system is not going to work if you're not sleeping well. And then the other thing that drives all that, as we know, is our food and hydration. So, the amount of investment we put into measuring someone's power, their GPS, all these fancy metrics, if your two foundations aren't in place, and that's where we're sort of trying to put a lot of our energy at the moment. If you don't have adequate sleep and adequate fueling and hydration, you're not getting the adaptation, you're not getting the recovery, the memory retention is not there, and the learning protocols are shifted for you as well. So that's the space of where I think, your Whoops, your auras, the constant glucose monitoring, hydration status. If you can get, like yourself, your N=1 own experiment, you probably see if you have everything in balance, your outputs are better. As you say, mate, mood's improved, energy levels are improved. So I think, that'd be an area that's definitely going to garner a lot of support and attention, mate, I think.
Yeah, it was quite interesting because where I go to the gym, there's a number of people that have got Whoops, and there was different personalities reacted differently. And we had one guy at the gym who had a Whoop, and he was almost obsessively chasing high recovery numbers, and it actually got to a point where it was unhealthy for him, because for him he was just constantly chasing it, and he wasn't getting what he wanted. Whereas for me, it's like, if I have a bad sleep, and I can see my numbers are bad and my recovery's poor, and I can feel the difference, then I can make just different decisions about how the day goes after that.
Yes.
And I guess in a training environment, that would be the same. If someone's had 3 terrible sleeps in a row, it's like, okay, well, there's something going on there, but actually we don't need to flog them on the pitch at the same time, because that's not going to be beneficial for anyone.
I think, mate, a story I can share, because ultimately our head coach in any team, and now it's probably the same as a company head, they have the final say. So, we were looking at some software, as previous team I was with, we're looking at some software from one of the big companies around that, could do a lot of that analytical work and try and look at outputs versus what happened on field, successful shots at goal, etc., and injury rates. And these people had sort of said to me, if we put in all this data, we can predict a percentage of injury rate. And I sort of said to coach, because you're saying, tell me what it could do. I said, well, if these things come in, there's a 35% this, chance this person's going to get injured. And he goes, okay. He said, can they prove that 35% of the people they've said will get injured at 35% got injured, or is it an algorithm? And I went back and asked, and they said, well, no, we haven't actually, got that much of our data yet to say that's it, and it was how it looks at it. And then his other thing he said is, okay, so 65% not going to get injured. And he's like, yeah. And he goes, so it's my job to gamble, is what you're telling me. It's my job to now gamble on those numbers. And he goes, because I'm going to tell you, I'm going to take 65% over 35% a whole lot of the time. And so straight away, you sort of look at it, and that's, again, what effect is data and your system going to have on your environment? And it depends, obviously, on sometimes, the people's appreciation or view of that. Now, could be part of our roles to try and sell that and to win them over and to prove to them that it's got point. But I found it was an historical story where I know some things have become a lot more accurate since then. But I still think in the same space, if you don't have rolling subs, for instance, in a game, if you don't have other things, then it's ultimately very much, we only can provide the information, and the decisions are made sometimes by other people. So it's, being as best informed as you can. But you may have someone that comes in, he's the only person that plays that position. You really need him for this weekend. It's the big game. And then all that data, you just have to say, well, he's playing and he's in, despite your best efforts to look after him and prepare. Hopefully you're always getting there before it becomes an urgency. That's the whole point. But there'll be other times, mate, where, the game and selection and whatever can override data sometimes, so yeah.
Like, and then when it comes to injuries aren't always load related. They're accidents on the field. And I guess in a team, sometimes there's so many people injured that you don't actually have a lot of choice about who's playing on Saturday.
Yeah, you don't, mate, and people can be dropped in last minute. You could be, as you say, we're resting someone one week, and all of a sudden someone else in their position is injured, and mate, they've got to come back in, and it's not always off the perfect preparation. And this is where sometimes we get caught up because they might come in and have a blinder, and you go, hey, look, they were on a down week, they weren't doing any of their training, they weren't doing their performance, they've had to come back in and look how well they played, and you wouldn't want that happening all the time, but it just goes to show that those ideas, and as you say, mate, things can still happen. So it goes right back to that one of the very first questions you have. You need to be pretty true to your centre, but because of people and environment, you're always going to have to be adaptive to outside of that, and sometimes just roll with the punches.
Cool, awesome. Well, we're coming up time. Hey, really awesome conversation. Really appreciate it. I guess the final question, just to sort of round things out, what for me, or for you, what is the biggest benefit of having data in the environment, and what's the biggest risk of having data?
Biggest risk is not fully understanding it and making big decisions on it without fully understanding it. Biggest advantage, we've already gone over pretty well, I think, is it's a good conversation starter. Because we're in the people business first and foremost, and if that's to educate them more about something that needs to be better, that's where I find it hugely powerful. So back in the day, mate, we used to just have to tell people they wanted to do extras, and everyone hated being the guy that, had to do that. Now you can show them exactly why. How do you compare to your normal self? How do you compare to your normal load? You're this far down. So it can be really advantageous, mate, sometimes, from an education point of view. So yeah, conversation education is great. The other flip side of it is getting lost in it. Doing all this work and just reporting on it, but taking so much time, it's taking away from something else that could be more valuable.
Awesome. That's so good. Thank you, Simon. Appreciate it.
No, thank you, John. It's been good to chat. Thanks very much.